Today's story takes place in Russia, where over a dozen people were claimed by the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga, which is another name for evil being, sent people to hell and took their souls from them. Sounds crazy, but based on true events, so let's begin. Sometime in the late 1960s, a man by the name of Alexei Samsonova observed this woman walking by on her way to work, and her name was Tamara. Alexei saw her and his heart immediately began to race. She looked so beautiful to him that he couldn't take his eyes off of her. Allegedly, Alexei was nervous and didn't know if he would ever see her again if he were to just let her walk away without saying anything. His mixed emotions left him indecisive and didn't know what to do, so he chose to follow her. After following her for some time, he was able to muster up the courage to introduce himself. During the initial introduction, Tamara also found Alexei attractive, so they both decided to exchange information and keep in touch with one another. About a week later, they went out together and had a wonderful time with one another. Alexei was so amazed with everything he learned about her during their date that he told Tamara that she would marry him one day. As time passed, they continued to romantically see one another, and in 1971, Alexei purchased an engagement ring and proposed. She accepted, and they became known as the Samsonovas. Within the city of St. Petersburg was a brand new apartment building that was almost finished being built. Russia was under tight financial restraints, and a lot of the country's infrastructure was in disrepair. So whenever Tamara and Alexei would pass this particular building during its construction phase, she had always talked about how wonderful it would be for them to live together in this brand new building. Allegedly, after passing by this building one day, Alexei noticed a sign there that stated that they were accepting applications for new tenants. Alexei used every connection he had to acquire one of the apartments in the building for his new wife. He got the apartment, and when he told her, she shed tears of joy. They moved in, and Tamara was so happy with their marriage that she began to keep a diary of all the things that were happening in their lives together. For over 28 years, they lived together in this apartment as a happy, loving couple. One morning, Alexei left his home, as he did every day for various reasons. Later that evening, he did not return home, so Tamara became worried. Tamara immediately contacted the authorities, and they did a search for Alexei. For over a month, the authorities actively searched for Alexei with no luck or leads. This is when another missing persons report was submitted to the authorities. A homeless person was rummaging through a trash bin and found a bag containing a dismembered body. With the help of the media, it was discovered that the body was that of a newly reported missing person man. When Tamara heard about the story, she immediately freaked out and was concerned that her husband could have met a similar fate. Alexei was such a loving and caring husband, which made it so difficult for Tamara to just accept this, so she kept her faith. Tamara never gave up and continued to check with the authorities for any progress for the next 15 years. She also continued to note everything she did in her diary. For over a decade, the police were finding dismembered body parts distributed throughout the city and in plastic trash bags. In most cases, the remains were carved up so small that the authorities were unable to identify many of the victims. The residents of the city believed that witchcraft or dark mystic forces were involved. Many residents were superstitious, so they warned each other to look out for the Baba Yaga because you could be next. Tamara found herself unable to sustain her lifestyle without her husband's income. Tamara came up with an idea to rent one of her bedrooms in order to supplement her income. The vacancy was posted within the local newspaper. Many transients who weren't from the area and had no friends and family would come to rent this affordable place to stay. It became so popular that whenever any of Tamara's tenants moved out, they were easily replaced with new tenants. One day, Tamara's girlfriend, Vicky, came by to visit her at her home. They talked for a while as friends do, and at the end of the conversation, Tamara requested a favor from Vicky. Tamara asked if she could stay at her house for a few weeks because her apartment was scheduled to be renovated. Tamara reassured Vicky that she would only need to stay at her home until the renovation project was complete, and she would be willing to pay her for her stay there. Vicky told her that she would let her stay, but she didn't have the space. Her relatives were staying with her at the time, so she wouldn't be able to allow Tamara to stay. But coincidentally, Vicky had another girlfriend by the name of Valentina. She lived alone and would be willing to help Tamara if Vicky were to ask her. Several days later, Vicky contacted Tamara and let her know that Valentina said that she could move in for a small monthly rent. For the first few months, they got along great together. Unfortunately, the relationship between the two began to unravel. So obviously, Valentina was ready for her to get out. Tamara, on the other hand, liked living in Valentina's apartment. She enjoyed the apartment, the setup and furnishings, along with the neighborhood. Tamara believed that this apartment was much better than her own, so she requested to stay there permanently with Valentina. Vicky came looking for an update, and Valentina was nowhere to be found. Vicky went to Tamara and asked if she had seen Valentina, and Tamara informed her that she left to go shopping earlier that day and hadn't been back home since. When Valentina still didn't return the following day, Tamara and Vicky became worried and went to the authorities to complete a missing persons report. Afterwards, Tamara felt so physically sad about Valentina's disappearance that she went to go back to her apartment to get some rest. One day, a tenant that lived in the same building of Valentina's was taking out the trash and noticed a plastic bag that smelled awful. The same tenant opened the bag and found the decapitated head of Valentina in it. The police were contacted and Tamara was brought in for questioning. Tamara denied being involved with the deletion of Valentina. So with no proof, the authorities went back to the apartment and did a search. They were shocked as to the gruesome evidence that they found. Tamara's diary was located. In it was explicit details on why and how she unalived Valentina and at least 13 other people, which included her husband. When Tamara was confronted with the evidence, she had to acknowledge that the diary was in her handwriting and the diary was hers. For almost 2 decades, she would allow tenants to stay in her apartment. Whenever they had a disagreement or Tamara was frustrated with their presence, it would trigger something in her mind that authorities would find out about later. She would then drug the victims until they were unconscious. Next, she would cut up each victim's body into small pieces and throw them out with the trash. The bodies were dispersed in separate locations where people would not notice them in the trash. A psychological analysis was done on Tamara, and it was discovered that she suffered from schizophrenia. The authorities believed that Tamara would become triggered by the victims, and she would then have a lapse in memory. Police believed that she could not recall that she actually unalived her victims due to her schizophrenia. The purpose for her diary was to help her remember the things she did when she had one of her schizophrenic episodes. The authorities believed that she was responsible for the deletions of many more missing persons that were not included in her diary. Because the authorities only had her diary and no bodies or other evidence, it wasn't enough to charge her for all the other homicides. Tamara was charged for her husband's deletion and Valentina's. Afterwards, Tamara was placed into an insane asylum indefinitely for the safety of the public.